Cool, right. So I put this together, I did it for a couple of other teams, and it's more about really being specific about how IDF impacts us and some of those other future projects that are coming, particularly the IPP data cleanse and that sort of stuff, just to put it in context of what it means for us and how our asset growth plans and the work we do, how it kind of progresses through. So hopefully, please stop, ask questions. It's not meant to be me just talking. These slides, they'll all be on Connected, and I can send you the links so that you've got them afterwards as well. So I just wanted to start from the top in the sense of thinking more about the asset growth plans and strategies that we do and how it fits into the context of sort of our bigger corporate planning. So this picture up here is what's been adopted as our corporate planning. So we have the vision, we have long-term plans, long-term financial plans, strategic asset management plans that then go into the corporate plan, then into operational plan and budget. And then we have our team plans, which we have, and into more of the measurement reporting and all the different reports that we do. So obviously over to the side here, there's informing strategies at that corporate level. So when we start to then think about where we kind of fit in the work that we do, so the asset, we work basically in that asset management system, and it inputs into it feeds back up into this strategic asset management plan. So when you think of this corporate reporting, we actually input into that box there, and we have our own little system. So this asset management system, this picture here is taken straight out of the strategic asset management plan, so the SAM. And what it looks at is the hierarchy then when you go across to that different arm, not the corporate planning arm, the asset management arm, then we drop down from the policy to the SAM. We then have asset management plans for each of our asset streams or classes. And then under that, we have a whole bunch of asset lifecycle strategies. So this is where all of our work predominantly happens. And so those asset lifecycle strategies consist of our growth strategy and plans. And all of our work in the sense of that planning space, noting also we obviously have a service provider aspect in terms of the SCADA side, which sits out, but I'll talk to that in a second. So all our growth strategy and plans are in here. So when we think of the Lake Wonga Water Asset Growth Plan, the Calliope, Boyne Calliope, the intersection growth plan, our cemetery strategy and plan, both of them still sit in this realm. And effectively what they're doing is working their way up to report back up through these different layers. So eventually there's aspects of each of those plans that make their way up and could eventually make their way up to trigger a change to a policy, like the cemetery stuff.
Yeah. Can I ask a question just right there? So our SAM and AM, which reports up to the SAM, has specific corporate goals in there from a corporate strategy that's been superseded. So there was a new strategy that came in play. Now, there's some of them that are really specific. We had to, for example, in the park space, reduce park cost by 10.2 million in this financial year, and there were some specific things. So I've got that in the back of my mind when I'm writing my cemetery strategy. There's cost cutting. We've got to, focus on cost containment to then work within our AMP and SAM, which is how we say we're going to run our assets, which then relates to a corporate plan which doesn't exist anymore, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So how does that work?
So when you think of this, it's a reiterative thing too. So the stuff flows down, the stuff also flows back. So as we do a piece of work, if it doesn't make sense what sits at that top level or some of those levels above, then we have the ability to do the optioneering like we've done with the cemeteries, is we've looked at, well, if we continue on the line and the level of service we're going, this is what it means. If we do B, this is what it means. If we do C, this is what. So what then needs to happen is then to feed back up to the asset management plans to get that basically changed, if that's the way to go. And that's through Mark Francis' approval as the asset manager. Sorry, changes to the asset management plans are done by the asset owner or approval. So our plans are approved by Mark Francis as the asset manager. Changes to that next level up being asset management plans as the asset owner. The SAMP is the CEO and the policy is council. So never ever are we going to be in a position where we're in this perfect world where they all line up and are saying the same things. Because it's how we evolve and work and improve as we get new things. So it is an awkwardness of the system that their review periods are not in line with each other. So, but just something we need to be aware of. Does that answer?
Yes, it does. I just was a bit stumped when the new corporate plan came down. And it doesn't align with what I.
Well, it just means that that picture needs to be updated, and then all the subsequent things need to also be updated to reflect it. That doesn't mean that when they developed the new corporate plan, they didn't have these existing systems in mind when they were doing it. So be mindful of that, I guess. So in terms of other asset lifecycle strategy, this is where the PAM team also plays a role, where they're looking at those renewal strategies and plans and also the maintenance strategy and plans. They're those three steps, I guess, of what makes up the lifecycle of an asset. And also, I guess it's not explicitly said here, but in both growth strategies and renewal strategies, there's an element of disposal in both of them. So that's, does that make sense? I guess we've never really looked at it visually like this, and this is something new that we've unpacked and gone through as a vendor and IDF, and different questions have come up. So then, as part of it, I then went, well, we've got the investment decision framework now, and we've also got the maintenance management framework. How do they actually interact with our asset management system? And where we landed is the maintenance management framework, and it's really in its infant stages. I guess it's nowhere near as advanced as where we've taken IDF to. And that's what Niels has been working on. So the maintenance management framework really has three phases. It's prepare and plan, it's do the work, so actually do the maintenance work, and then it's reflect, almost like let's look at the data, look at the data and can we change the plans at the front. So it's a bit of a circular thing. So the MMF, it basically sits within, I'm not sure if they can see my pointer on the screen. It sits within this asset management system enabler. So it's just an enabler as opposed to a specific line item. It's just a series of processes, forms, templates, governance about how we do maintenance. All that, Then the IDF really sits as other business frameworks, and that's predominantly we had a fair bit of discussion around this as whether it fits in or out, but because IDF covers things outside of the asset maintenance framework around business improvement, then it landed that it sits outside, but obviously we use it heavily within the asset management system to make sure we're making good investment decisions. Any questions on that?
I was going to say with the asset owner, and how much we engage them with our life cycle strategies. They own the asset, but we are essentially rolling out a way to manage that asset within our SAMP and our M. So they obviously need to be engaged in how we go about managing the asset as the asset owner. I'm just curious about how much.
Yeah, so in our model, when they did that bit of a review about the model and they brought out and looked at who plays an asset owner versus an asset manager versus an asset, a service provider, where they landed was that really the asset owner in this business actually plays a really small part in the asset management system, and they effectively delegated a lot of the activities that an owner would typically do to the asset manager.
Yeah.
So which is why the answer to that question is very little.
Yeah.
And so obviously we would engage with them if they were a stakeholder in the sense of, you know, Sarah Hunter we would bring in because she was doing something similar or whatever. But we're not necessarily bringing her in as the asset owner. We're more bringing her in because of her role.
Yeah.
So they very much have said that other than doing those really top level stuff in terms of the corporate planning side, we're effectively doing all the other planning. They approve the asset management plan, so Carly Quinn and Mark Holmes are the asset owners that approve those plans, and the CEO approves the SAMP. But in terms of doing any of the work, the asset management plans are for
all the important people. That's really big.
Yeah, so it's a bit different model here, and that's only something because I had a lot of feedback saying, well, the asset owner should be giving us direction and setting these strategies, and you know, be doing the asset strategies, and you know, but where it's landed is we are doing the asset strategies and the plans, and they sit down in this as part of these asset life cycle strategies.
Makes sense.
Make sense? No questions, Verity or Jacinta?
No, all good.
You can hear this conversation okay?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I had a few different goes at trying to put this together, and really what I'm trying to show is how the different teams, how the key teams, I guess, and I'm really focusing capital investments here, really play a role. And I was meant to go back and fix this up with one thing, but I'll explain what that is. And put it in the perception or the perspective of the IDF. So really in the first 3 phases, so establish, identify and assess, so this is where we're building the business case for the investment, is really asset planning and asset performance and monitoring that typically will do that. And that's because we do the plans, those asset lifecycle plans. All staff, anyone can put in an idea effectively. We don't expect that all staff will, but the system's set up that they can. So then asset planning is typically going to, and asset performance and monitoring are taking it through those first 2. The bit I was going to put in there that I didn't go back and do is probably more around the SCADA team. And the SCADA team probably plays a pretty heavy part from select phase, or not necessarily these 2 in this execute phase, but certainly you're a key stakeholder in a lot of these projects all the way through. What I'm capturing here is sort of who's the lead team that's doing these activities. Yeah, we stay a stakeholder for a lot of these all the way through. So the engineering asset solutions team and asset design team are typically doing these middle two phases, so they're the concept and detail design. And then over the execute is when asset governance comes in, because they're updating the register and doing those types of activities. And asset performance and monitoring also kicking in this phase, because that's as part of the maintenance management framework, that's when it starts. So they're in from there as well. Works planning and scheduling are in from gate 2, because that's when the PM starts, so they then go right the way through. The environment, conservation and property acquisition disposal teams, they're right in from start to end, and I've been working with them around what types of things are they interested in at the different phases, because it changes, because obviously they're looking at high level and then it gets more detailed every step of the way. And then obviously your stakeholders and delivery teams are effectively in all the way in different aspects. Does that kind of make sense? Was that what you understood? This is nothing really new?
It's good to have the visual.
Yeah. And I've shared this with all the managers as well, for them to use and share across, or to share across anyone, really. And I have fun putting little pictures in. Was there any questions on that one? From anyone? No?
So you're saying works planning schedule come in at the design phase now?
Yes.
So does that mean how design run their consultants, will the PM now run it with the design lead?
No. So the project manager is there about setting up, doing the reporting.
Yeah.
They're looking at the delivery approach. They're doing the project management plan. So it's more about the mechanics of that actual project operation, as opposed to the actual design work.
Yeah.
That's done in the EAS and asset design teams. Yeah. So if EAS because they're the design lead, we have a project manager, and then underneath is a design lead, construction lead, procurement lead, are the different roles that exist in the project management framework. And so one of the EAS engineers is that design lead. Yeah. And so if they have a choice, we deliver it internally and obviously utilise the asset design team, or they can choose to deliver it externally and they project manage that little purchase as such. Yeah. But yeah, that's something new over the last 12 months, I guess, we've been introducing, or 6 months been introducing, that the PM starts from the start of concept design. It used to be they only started from the start of detailed design. So that's kind of been a change over the last 6 months, hasn't it?
Yeah. So they're just overviewing the project from start to finish, really. It's just the capitalisation part of it. They're part of the design, obviously keeping track to identify when it has to go through those next phases of that project.
So, and that's with the idea that from gate 2 onwards, typically the cost will be capital, not operational, so CapEx, not OpEx. Righto, so then if we break it down into our own team, just wanted to give an idea of the different roles that we'll play. So Mark, as the GM of SAP, he will be required to appoint sponsors to investments. He may be a sponsor on some of them, or he may be a stakeholder in these projects. So, manager asset planning. Boy picture.
Just a round circle.
So manager asset planning could be a sponsor or sponsor's rep. So in the case of if Mark's the sponsor, he might appoint Scotty as the sponsor's rep. they may have to appoint a sponsors rep. So say Scott's the sponsor, then he might say, okay, Liz, this is a waste one, can you be the sponsors rep? They will be the line manager, giving that gate 0 approval. So anything that comes out of an asset growth plan will go through gate 0. And so Scotty will be the line manager, and me, when I'm back, I'm coming back, will approve that, and also be a stakeholder. So then in terms of the team, you will typically be the proponent in a lot of cases, progressing investments through to gate 2. So that's effectively doing business cases. You may be asked to be a sponsors rep, particularly from gate 2 onwards. And you also may be stakeholders in different investments. And probably that stakeholder for the SCADA team really is where I see you're a stakeholder in a lot of those, any of those projects that have SCADA included in, and you should be identified. Righto, so all staff can establish a new idea, like we talked about, and staff that use IDF will become champions. So trying to convince everyone that it's going to become a champion. and what that's all about, other than me being silly, is that IDF is not just the team we can choose to follow or not. It's how we make decisions in this business. It's not optional. And Brooke will be on to you.
Just probably with that line manager approval gate 0, it's not, historically it's always been left to that end of financial year where this is just ongoing. So as we do activities, when we identify a need, we start implementing the idea to push it through.
Yeah, this doesn't have to be wait till a certain time when you're told to enter something into IPP. This is as things come up, the idea is to progress them through. The IDF effectively creates that pipeline of work, and we use IPP to capture it. Yeah. Trying to get away from the yearly update of IPP.
That's the problem with, I don't know if this is a silly question or not, but I'm saying silly questions. How do you control those gates? So obviously there's a whole bunch of stuff, IPP, the IPP tech market is full of bids, irrelevant stuff, but also relevant. This gate, the next gate, so that would be grade 2, from those, where, like, how do we move between the gates? Is it a form? Is it a, how do we get to that next stage with getting? So
there's, for the first 2 phases,
yeah.
So assess and, not select, identify and assess.
Yeah.
There's a form that you're basically filling out in the phase. That's the business case.
Okay, right. That's,
yeah. So you've got the business case, just the problem statement part is identified, and then you get gate 1 approval if you need it. And if you're just a standard project, you just continue straight on to filling out the rest of the business case.
So if someone walks up to Beck in asset governance, say, oh, hey, can you just put some money in the budget on this, so so this people are aware that this process is in place. So what she should say is go back to gate 0.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is about how we do investments and we spend money. Yeah. And you need to have an investment decision, so a gate decision, as well as the budget decision to be able to progress and do the work.
Yeah. Okay.
And so we're now making them 2 things. So no longer are we just saying, hey, back at it. We're going, okay, go back and fill out the investment opportunity brief Go see your line manager. If they think it's a good idea, we'll assign a sponsor and then we'll go to identify phase and we'll nut out what the actual problem is we're trying to solve or what opportunity we're trying to take up. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah, it's just how it goes through those. Who is the person controlling that? And a lot of.
What do you mean controlling it? So the sponsor is the gate.
Just even the stuff that's in there now. Just obviously there's claims that has been.
And I can talk more about exactly what that looks like because we're getting detail on
Because
that
that's
now.
probably part of where I'm.
Yeah, okay, let hold that,
Yes.
and if it doesn't clear it up with what I tell you about it, then we'll continue. Any other questions on that? So a high-level process for asset growth plans. So I know this come up with the cemeteries just recently, and I thought we've never actually wrote it down, and this is something in the team plan that Danielle's going to do in terms of process-wise of documenting a lot of this, but as a starting point. So we start with an item in our team plan that we have to do a particular asset growth plan. And later on, we can use that example. It was in the team plan, or maybe we can have team plans at that. Say it was in the team plan, so we identified we need to do it. We then obviously undertake that work. We undertake the Lake Wonga asset growth plan. Once we've done it, we then take it for approval as the asset manager, Mark Francis is the approver. He has delegation to approve them. He may request that a report go to the ELT or council, and that may be just for information sharing, for maturity. It may be because he wants them as part of deciding, and it may be for the full report, or it may just be for elements of the report. So for the cemeteries, as an example, there's elements of that potentially will get escalated up.
Yeah.
But our first step is to Mark. And he is the one that makes that decision. It's not for us to decide that avenue, if that makes sense. Then once we've got the approval of our water asset growth plan, we've obviously got a whole list of investments that are at the back end of that, that we've identified we've got to do. So we then start the established phase and fill out that investment brief for each one of those. There is an exception here because obviously there's some of those items in the Lake Wonga asset growth plan particularly that already exist in the IPP, and then it's a case of updating those business cases as opposed to starting them afresh, if that makes sense. So say there's not in it, so we do the investment opportunity brief and we get Gate 0 approval, so that'll be Scott or I approving those. It will then go through the process of getting assigned a sponsor and all those elements. Is the IOC involved or all that? So then it goes through, then we continue them through the assess and identify phase, and this is where we build the business case. And this is something that I see that these two boxes were effectively doing straight away almost. But there is gates that we've got to stop at. So we're completing the business case. In this particularly identify phase, we may actually have to undertake more additional modelling or investigation. So I use as an example, and it may not happen straight away. These might be cases where it doesn't actually happen straight away. But in the Lake Wonga asset growth plan, there's one there around, where we say we're going to build a water reservoir. Well, we might actually do a little bit more modelling when it gets closer to understand exactly what size, or just to lock that down to make sure that's actually what we need to do. So this is probably something that's a little bit new for us. We've always gone from asset growth plans straight into design. We've never done this middle step of making sure that what the growth plans told us we needed to do was actually, the right solution. Because the business case is about going, what are all the options we can do? And whilst the growth plan has nominally said we need a reservoir, well, we need to go back and make sure that there's not a different solution that has the same output or effect, if that makes sense. And it's probably, this is where we probably need to look at the process, and I haven't worked out in my head, is we've got to be looking a couple of years ahead in terms of what are the assets that are coming up to be built and need design work done in, say, the next 2 years, and we've got to add it into our team plan to do that specific business case and modelling for those items. So, yeah, that's probably something we've just got to unpack a little bit more of how that actually happens and what are our triggers for which ones we do that for. And then obviously the IDF continues select onwards, where we are typically going to act as a sponsor or sponsors rep for those projects. So does that give some clarity around how these progress through?
So within the schedule of works, we have like a 2036 pump station planned. Will it essentially sit at that gate 0 until the time that we're ready to do that detailed planning or modelling?
That's a good question, and I had thought about it, don't have an answer, and I have to come back because the IPP is a 10-year view. What is the best option for those outer years, knowing that we do a review of these plans? Where do we actually put those? Very good question. Can I come back to you on that in 2.5 days?
Or 3 months.
2.5 months. No, I'm going to take it down as it's. I had thought about that because we have an issue at the moment where we have an 11th year that we could park it in, but every year the 11th year becomes the 10th year. So we've got to figure out, every year we go through a process of moving everything back out to the 11th year. And that's not working. And I'd hate to go and add in a whole lot more in that 11th year and make the problem even worse. So it's almost like we need feel or to be able to put it in the,
100-year model.
Yeah, because we're not actually able to say what year. So, yeah, it's one of those, I guess there's two things. I don't know whether you guys have a preference. One is somehow we enter it to IPP and it just stays in kind of a never column, and every year we just review that column and bring it in if it makes sense to. Or it doesn't actually go into IPP until it hits that 10th year, like every time we do a review of that plan.
I was going to say, is the case that it sits operational until some triggers within that 10 year?
So it's operation, the first 2 phases are OPEX anyway.
Yeah, no. I just think it's just going to continue to sit there until.
Yeah, does it even need to sit in there? Is I guess what I'm questioning, or do we have enough? Do we have enough control ourselves to know that we're reviewing these plans often enough to then trigger to add it when it slides into that 10th year?
This is the example of that reservoir in the actual IDF training that we did, the reservoir needed in 2041, which was in 20 years' time.
But it had a trigger to maybe bring that forward into an earlier year. Yeah.
But if we, our asset management system should be the trigger stuff. So like a pump station, we should be able to look at our asset management system and go, A 510 is due for replacement in 2089.
Yeah.
And then when we get to 2079, brings it into the IPP.
Which is what we do with the renewal programs.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Niels' team is doing. And so they're very clear. They have, the projects will be set up as we go through this cleanse to be 21-22 pump station replacement program, 22-23. So there's a project for each year's program. So that's clear.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe it's the same essence for us. Every year they just tack on a new project and fill up what that program is.
So I think the replacement program is there, and what Salisa's talking about is the capital expense, the new stuff like the new reservoir that doesn't have an existing asset. This is the stuff I think that Royal, this is what you were talking about, Royal? No, maybe I've got that wrong. I'll just stop talking.
Yeah, well, I'm with you in the sense of where we have reservoirs not triggered until 2036, so it's outside that 10-year. Do we put them in IPP? The question is, do we enter them through gate 0, knowing they're outside the 10 years? Or do we just not enter them and wait till they hit that 10-year point and then we enter them through gate 0? That's the question, I think.
Yeah, I guess
And I
there
can't-
should be a trigger in the plan that says enter the IPP now.
Yes, so the asset growth plans will have a trigger date to say it's needed by 2036.
Yeah, then do that modelling.
And obviously we might assume 5 years, it takes 5 years to go through design or whatever, or 3 years, whatever you assume. So we've got to enter it into IPP in 2033.
What's the frequency of reviewing growth plans?
It was set at 5 years.
So even if it's 20 years out, you're going to be reviewing it
Correct.
4 times before you even need to look at it. So it probably doesn't need to sit until something twigs it to say it's within 10 years.
Yeah, so I think we just need to capture it in our processes as we go, as we create them, and Danielle's going to lead that, is a trigger that every year we do a check of our asset growth plans to see if anything's fallen in that 10-year period. Might be a way to manage it.
Because there will be changes, like even if it's from the network side of things, water, if you get additional subdivisional work in a certain area, that will increase the likelihood of something coming along earlier than what was expected.
Yeah.
So it's just that constant review in that periodic format. So if it's every 5 years, we go and do this activity, it'll either say things bring forward or things get pushed out, depending on what the change in environment is.
Yeah. I will take back that, get an understanding and clear direction on that 11th year, and particularly what exists in there now, because it's frustrating what we have to do every year in terms of shifting, because it moves to the 10th year and then we have to shift out all this stuff, which is...
Well, I was going to say, part of that is sometimes you just keep it in the 11th year, so it's going to stay there. What's the purpose of pushing things out that's not even needed?
That's right, and I think that's an element as part of the data comes that maybe we need to actually delete out anything that isn't genuinely 11th year. If it's way beyond that, then we need to actually get rid of it. But yeah, there's things like the Glenline 480 and big projects like that sit in the 11th year.
Well, a good example would be the Hudnall Bridge.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably 11 years, probably 50 years away.
I need it for my cemetery development. No, just joking. I can't do anything with the balance of land until they do that bridge.
Righto, any other questions on that? Does that help and give some clarity on how we're progressing stuff through? So asset planning outcomes relevant to IDF. So really, and this is probably just repeating the same information, but our role is to progress investments through to Gate 2 approval. That is our role in this, and not just progressing them, it is about making sure that we've got a real genuine business case and that the recommended option is genuinely we should build and it's needed. So it's not just a paper exercise of copy paste into this template and move on. The point of it is we're setting up the teams that take this over up for success, and they're doing, we actually need to do this.
So just a quick question on that. In the past, we've had strategy transformation do some budget some big documents for some of their stuff, and we've had other teams do bits and pieces. So is that now all going to be done by asset planning, or they will still continue to do? We'll just do SAP stuff, and then the relevant teams will do non-SAP stuff and pass it through the gate to as needed. Is that how that will work?
Yeah, so it's intended that they, like Ericsson would be the proponent for those projects that he's dealing with, like those big strategic projects as such in his realm, which typically are going to be those significant projects. So he would act as that proponent and progress it through those first stages and do that paperwork, as opposed to us done it in the past. So we're clearing up really clearly who the proponent is. And so if we're identified as the proponent, then we're the ones doing it. And typically the SAP asset world, us or Pam will be the proponent in those early phases. That's pretty obvious. The only variation to that, and I can show that on that picture, it kind of is there, is that for urgent investments, typically EAS engineer, so that design lead will be the one doing gate 0 and then obviously take over gate 3. That's probably the only variation on that, because they obviously want to progress that through really quickly. But things like it may be that someone puts in an idea, so they start as a proponent, say something comes from CD&E, however it's a SAP asset realm, we might then take over the proponent. So the proponent can change.
I was just thinking that timeline of, asset planning was to this point, up to gate 2, and did that mean then that asset planning did all of
No. I was more focusing on majority of our capital investments. This is kind of who the main teams are on an 80-20 basis.
No, that's good.
No, that's cool. So stakeholder engagement is an absolute must. It's at identify phase, we need to be doing the engagement form. We've got an improvement activity already where we've identified we've got to have a lot more examples in that engagement form to stop people kind of having to reinvent the wheel every time, because a lot of our assets, they're the same stakeholders, or it's just replace water with roads delivery, or, so we're trying to update that template to give a lot more clarity or examples, so that you kind of just copy and pasting or deleting the ones out that aren't relevant, as opposed to having to think of them every time.
It's probably worth noting on that, by doing that activity, you're also highlighting who in those next phases need to be involved too. So
so we have an opportunity to add SCADA. If you know there's going to be SCADA, add them in, so the next teams that pick it up, they actually include them. Exactly right. And the idea is that engagement plan is updated at every phase, because how I need to engage with the SCADA team in the identify and assess may be very different to how I engage with them when it comes to actually building the stuff. Or, so it may not be, but that's just an example where it does change over time. The operations team might say, Clint might say, I want to be involved in the problem statement, heavily involved, so we get across the problems we're having, but then having to pull back until it gets to maybe the concept design, so it could change in phases, and could change too on people's workloads as well. So it's really important, and I mean, I've done it for this project. We actually ring up and say, hey Ed, I've got you down as a stakeholder. I'm in this phase, how do you want to be involved? And Ed might say, I just want a monthly update. Just send me a quick email saying where I'm at. Or I want to be heavily involved in when you do the problem statement because I've got all these ideas. Or I need an update every minute. So it's actually asking them, and then you don't have to assume, because I got caught out in this project where I assumed someone wanted to be involved heavy. So I did, and then they told me why it's no value. And so I went, oh, well, I just assumed you would want to be. And so then I could drop them back to just monthly update. Yeah. We have a responsibility to give a clear recommended option at gate 2. So we're being really clear of what is this project. There's a brief scope about what it is. That then gets used going forward. If there's any change to that scope and that recommended option, it triggers a project change request. So this is trying to stop that creep where we say renewal footpath, and then we go to design, and then we go, oh, now we're going to add in the replacement of the water main, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and now we've got a $3 million project that started at $1.5 million. So the idea is that there's clear decision that has to be. We probably still would have ended at that point, maybe not. But the point is that no one actually stopped to go, well, is this investment actually beneficial now? Should we actually done something different, not built the main street on a hill and put it somewhere else? You know, so there's that. Whole of life costs considered. So we're putting a really conscious effort on what is, as part of that business case, in terms of determining best option. It's not just that upfront cost. And I get we've got some growth in that space, but using that tool Thomas shared with it is a good start. Additional investigation and modelling to ground truth asset growth plans. This is probably the newest item. The rest is probably we've already done in the past, but this is the new item around and having the processes of looking ahead of what's going to be triggered for design in the next couple of years. Okay, we've got a piece of work we need to do to actually make sure it's needed. And so that's kind of the pseudo review of bid documents we've been doing at budget time every year, but we've got to transition into doing that on a business as usual and not just at budget time. So, but that line item in itself will take a couple of years till we get to that point. I get that. Okay, so IPP data cleanse. So the objective of it is by December 21, and it's actually start of December 21, I've been informed. The IPP register, which is in Tech 1, can confidently be used to inform Council's long-term planning, the 22-23 budget, and the 22-23 and 23-24 capital investments that have passed Gate 2 can be added to the capital portfolio. So at the moment, we're not willing, we don't have confidence in our IPP data to add those extra years before we do a review of it. And also one of the drivers for the long-term financial planning is also we said we're not confident in the data, so council we're not getting you the whole list of the 10-year projects because honestly cannot do something that we have no confidence in. So how we're measuring it, so the measures are that we can confidently provide a list to councils because they've been requesting that every year and we just push back on it. And we're able to provide data to the capital portfolio team to actually add it into that capital portfolio. So the scope of it is that it's looking at the whole 10 years. We're going to remove duplicate entries for the same investment, which there's a fair few. We're going to apply the project setup business rules, so we've developed business rules about how these projects will actually exist. And that's more an asset governance thing to do. We're going to review all projects to ensure the IDF phase and category are correct. So at the moment, I've just assigned them based on my knowledge and doing a first run, I guess. We're going to review all projects to remove any that are no longer required. And we're going to identify for each investment the funding outcomes relevant for external grants and funding. Review investments that have been identified as check if complete. So there's about 800 of them that appear to be completed, but I'm worried there's some in there that haven't actually been completed and slipped through the cracks. So they're typically ones that just have no money in the future years. So that we can clean them out and mark them as complete and archive them basically. We're going to identify the process for archiving investments when not required or being complete. So I actually have documented the process for that so we don't end up with the same problem. So that's the scope, which is a lot. I've then given, which I'm presenting this to the ELT tomorrow. So there's 3 options of how we can actually approach this and do it. So, and I've got the minimum, the absolute minimum required that I think we need to do to achieve the objective of this. Then we've got, if we had we've got enough time, then I'd be recommending option 2. And then option 3 is basically best case scenario. So option 1 is where we do a high level review of all investments. So that's more around the need and the project setup rules and getting rid of the duplicates and kind of just that structure stuff. And some of those key, a minimum amount of fields, I guess, we're assessing. But then we do a detailed review of the 22-23 investments. Sort of similar to what we've done previous years, I guess, just do the next year. Option 2 is where we do a detailed review for the next 4 years, which basically represents, which basically represents getting us 3 years ahead so that we can populate the capital portfolio properly. And then we do a high level review for the remainder, and then the third option is where we do a detailed review for everything. So I've also, I don't think I put in here, I've also gone in and just put some hours, some man hours against each of these, noting that we've got to do it over the next 5 months. I don't think we have time to do anything but option 1. And that's the discussion I'm having tomorrow with the exec. And they've got to make some decisions around how we actually proceed. So that's what it looks like. Just if you're curious.
Did you say how many projects are in Tech 1?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I've got to meet a couple there. There's about 2,000.
Wow.
It blew my mind when I did this analysis.
This is one of the questions I have, is the ownership of these projects, or the sponsor. So when a person leaves and the sponsor, how does that work in Tech 1? There's a lot
very manual at the moment.
Yeah, because that's part of that legacy problem, is that no one owns those projects. It's sort of floating in there with a past manager's name on them.
Yeah, so we need to get better at putting a sponsor to it, and not everything will have a sponsor from the get-go. So we've got to work through and add that in. So everything that already has a sponsor assigned, and that's pretty much just stuff that's already in the capital portfolio, we'll transfer that data across. But yeah, and it's on a person basis, not a position basis, and that's how Tech 1 is set up. So until we can transition to position basis, we're not going to overcome that issue. But yeah, it is a problem.
Yeah.
So just in answer to the question of number, so total projects in IPP is 2,382. 47 are clearly marked as completed. 810 need to be checked if they're actually completed, because they've got no money in the future years. And when I did a sample, majority I knew that were completed, but I found one that I know definitely wasn't completed, and it's just it went into a budget, never got done, but the budget never got moved out. So I'm a little bit cautious if we go and complete them all off, we Yeah, yeah. We've got 4 that are income only, and that's just associated to projects like that TIDS funding that we get regularly every year. 408 clearly said not required, so they can be archived. 212 are OPEX type projects. So what I found, there's projects in there do Lake Awonga water modelling. Like there's stuff like that in there. So we've got to figure out how we're actually going to deal with operational stuff, which is this year, 21-22, we'll figure out. So that leaves 901 actual work that's considered capital that we need to assess if it's still needed. And I've gone and mapped it across the different categories. So significant, it's about 1.3% are significant, 15% are advanced, 83 is standard, and 0.2 is urgent. So that was cool to see. But what was even cooler, and what I wanted to show you, is this graph. Oi! So this is just the count of investments and the current phase of it. So you've got to assess, the current phase it's in and where that money first shows up in the IPP. So obviously in these front years, we've got a lot that span over all the phases, and as we would expect, as you get further out here, you wouldn't expect to have projects sitting out here that are in, that have had concept design and all ready for execution. So that was pleasing to see. That's kind of how I expected, other than this big spike and a drop off, and then a big spike. This is the 11th year. So, yeah, that's kind of the makeup of the colour. So, any questions?
Well done.
It's been interesting. It's been very interesting. And I promise I've been doing a lot. Any questions, Jacinta or Verity? You still with us?
I'm still here. No, it's very interesting. No questions.
So I can share this with you, this IPP data cleanse. It will have a big draft sticker over it because it's by no means, it's just in the mode of stakeholder review at the moment, key stakeholder review. So, yeah, but that's where we are.
Very good.
Which is
It's a big
interesting.
job to go through it, and it's something that needs to be staying on top of, I guess.
Yeah.
It reminds me of in banking, there's a big data system of all your customers, and every customer's allocated to a manager, and if that manager left, it was handed to the next person, and they had this list that they owned, and they had to stay on top of and report on, and that's probably something in need here. So you don't end up with doing another cleansing in 5-10 years time.
Correct.
The same process.
Yeah.
Someone needs to own it. A role needs to own it.
Well, the sponsor owns it.
Yes.
The sponsor is your decision maker in the sense of that.
And if that sponsor changes, they inherit that. And
if the sponsor changes, then it's hard to hand it over. The issue we have in this business is that you don't actually have anyone to hand over to before you leave. And then it goes into limbo land, and so that's where there's this responsibility needs to then be passed up to, the manager or GM to actually hand that over. Yeah. So we don't have that discipline, so I can't guarantee that's going to happen, but you're absolutely right, it should be. Yeah. And certainly we can build it into our stuff to make it happen. But yeah, as a global thing, it's not built in, and that'll come with maturity. We can't make everything perfect in the first hit. It's definitely an 80-20 rule that's been implemented. Righto, that's all I had, unless anyone had any other specific questions. Has that been useful or?
Very useful.
Yep. Cool. Excellent.
I liked your timeline. I think that visual's good as to when we sit.
Yep.
Within staff, mostly essentially within staff.
Yep.
In that.
I just probably need to put some words around it that it's not the only place that you sit, but it's just where you take the kind of major role. Predominant role, yeah. Yeah, because otherwise people go, but I do stuff in there, and that's not. If we took that view, then I'd just put all teams across every phase, and that wouldn't help anything. Yeah. And it also helps too if you've got questions about a certain phase, they're probably a good team to start with because they're involved all the time. So yeah. Okay, that is all I have. I have cheesecake out in the fridge that if you would like to join me for morning tea,